Hi, in this video we're going to be talking about time trials, also known as TTs, because they can be really effective and pure way of benchmarking your current fitness level, and as a means of comparing your fitness level now with a point in the future after you've done a certain amount of training. Now, before I go any further, I'll just say now that if getting faster isn't a particular goal of yours for your running at the moment, maybe, then you might want to just skip at this point to the next video, okay? Because this is all about testing yourself over time or distance to see how fast you are, all right? So it might not be directly relevant if running for you is more about just you getting out the door, keeping your fitness going and maintaining your fitness and improving more gradually, which is absolutely fine. So if that's you, then you don't need to watch any further. But if you are interested in time trials and getting quicker with your training, then carry on watching. So your running history plays a really big part in determining what kind of time trial you're going to do as an assessment. So in future videos, I'll be talking to you about different benchmarking assessments that you can do related to mobility, etc. But for now, we're just going to be looking at time trials to see where you are in your running speed, really. So if you're doing, there's two different ways you can do a time trial. Either it's distance-based or it's time-based. So I'm going to talk about distance-based time trials first, and then I'll talk to you later on in the video about time-based time trials, okay? So for a lot of people, you just want to know how fast you are right now over a particular distance. And so this is one of the things that I tend to use a lot with the people that I coach as a time trial over a certain distance. So usually it's a 5K or a 10K, because that's kind of my, the main things that people are looking for in terms of their training. Even if they're training for a half marathon or marathon, still a 5K and 10K time trial are the things that are more manageable, helpful in terms of an indication of where they're at right now, and also they aren't going to have lots of time to need to recover after it compared to if they did a half marathon time trial, for example. So these are really useful because you can then use them to kind of join the dots over time about how you're getting on with your training. So I would say initially that you need to really try to use them quite sparingly. So every 6 weeks to 2 months, I would say maybe do a time trial, just because of the amount of effort and time that it can take out of your body, and also the time it takes to prepare so you're ready to do it in the first place. Because you're going to be working really hard, hopefully, during the time trial. Okay, so the question then really becomes, what distance should I be doing my time trial over? Now, if you're doing it for distance, then it needs to be something that you know you can comfortably run in terms of distance already. So there's no point giving yourself a 10K time trial if actually you've only ever run up to 3K before. I mean, this hopefully is common sense, but it is worth just putting it out there just to make sure we're not overdoing things for ourselves. If for example 3K is the furthest you've run before or recently, then I wouldn't do a time trial of more than 1 mile. All right, give yourself that as your benchmark. How fast can you do 1 mile? Right, okay, let's do that, and then use that as the basis to then either do comparative distance time trials in the future, again over 1 mile, or if your mileage starts to increase and your distances start to increase, then you could graduate that up to 3K or 5K over time. If more of your runs are kind of 8 miles plus, then you could be quite confident knowing that a 10K time trial is something that you could have a go at. So 10K is just over 6.2 miles, all right? So the problem then becomes, once you've worked out what distance you're going to try and cover in the time trial, is thinking about how best to approach it in terms of what speed should I start at. All right, and this This is something that you might find quite difficult initially until you become a bit more experienced as a runner and a bit more in tune with your body and what you're capable of at that particular moment in time. It's very, very easy to overcook a time trial and start out way too fast and then end up either having to stop before you get to the finish or really struggling in the latter stages of the time trial. So what we really want, ideally, would be for you to be able to maintain an uncomfortable pace to all the way through that's quite consistent, that leaves you at the end thinking, you know what, I'm really pleased that I've stopped there because I don't think I had much more left. So when you're trying to determine that, use your recent training as a guide, all right? And also what we're thinking about there is considering your effort level for the training that you've done up to that point. So if up to this point, every time you've gone out, you've been at a 10 out of 10 effort level pace, then when you do a time trial, it's unlikely that you're going to see much progress in terms of your speed because everything else you've been doing has been at a 10 out of 10 effort level as well. Whereas if a lot of your running has been at a lesser effort level pace, when you come to do a time trial and you're trying your hardest, then you're probably going to see a really nice, quick time relatively compared to what you've been doing up to that point. I do go into pacing a lot more in the bonus pacing module towards the end of this program. All right, so look out for that and have a look into pacing there. I wouldn't worry too much about it at the moment though, while you're just starting out and maybe doing a time trial for the first time. It's really useful to just go in not knowing very much initially and just giving it a go. Just give it a go, see what happens and learn from it, okay? Right, that's effort levels. Okay, if you were then going to do a time trial by thinking about a particular amount of time you wanted to run for, you could say, for example, use 10 minutes or 12 minutes. I'll talk about 12 minutes and I'll explain why in a moment. So if you chose, right, I know I can run for say 20 minutes or so without, too much bother, then do a time trial of say 12 minutes because you know you can run for 12 minutes already, but now you're going to see how far you can go in those 12 minutes. And then that can be your measure for the future is, right, okay, I'm going to try again, see how far I can go again in 6 weeks' time in 12 minutes. The reason I've said 12 minutes is because there's actually quite a famous test called the Cooper test, which is done over 12 minutes. And it's been done with people of all different ages and genders. And so what you can do, once you've got your 12-minute Cooper test distance, you can then compare yourself with on a grid about based on your age and based on your gender as well, to see kind of where you fit on that scale. And then the motivation becomes, right, well, can I get myself into that next category along? So there's lots of stuff online about this Cooper test, and that was one of the things that I liked about the Endomondo app when I first got it, was they actually used your data and gave you a Cooper test time. Now that's not on Strava, but Strava does give you a best estimated effort over 1K, 1 mile, 5K, 10K, half marathon and marathon, or whatever distances, significant different distances you've done, you'll get a Strava time for if you've logged your runs on Strava. But yeah, so that 12-minute Cooper test time can be quite useful. Now, if a lot of your runs are say 40 minutes plus, then you might want to do a time trial for say 20 or 25 minutes. So it's comfortable for you in terms of you can run for that long, but you don't know necessarily how far you can run when you really try hard and maintain a difficult pace for the whole time. So you could do 20 or 25 minutes and use that as a time. Now, some tips for you. However you approach a time trial, it's really important to bear in mind the uncontrollables that we talked about in Module 1. So, for example, it might be that on the day you wanted to do your time trial, it's really, really windy. Now, if that's the case and you're going into a headwind, it's worth documenting that in the description or in your training log, which we'll come on to in a future video, just so that you've got a note of that, so that next time you do a time trial over the same distance or the same time, you can remember that, you know, it's there for you to help you in terms of comparing that information. So that's one thing. Bear in mind the uncontrollables. It might be absolutely hammering it down with rain. It might be really, really cold or really, really hot, which again will affect how well you can perform in a time trial. So having that information is useful to contextually compare it with any other run that you do over a time trial. The next thing I would say is, for your time trial, is to use a route that you can replicate quite easily again. So if it stays the same, then it's much better in terms of a comparison, in terms of accuracy, than if you ran completely different route each time you did a time trial. Also, I'd say try to make sure that the route is as flat as possible. Okay, that way it helps you maintain a pace and a rhythm that is consistent, which will help you run further for longer. Because any kind of hills can really distort the time that you do, but also the effort that you're going to take can have a massive impact on what happens after you've negotiated a hill. So if it's an uphill, it will really take a lot out of you. If it's a downhill, you'll be artificially going faster than you could do on the flat. So have a nice flat route if you can. And then finally, there's nothing more frustrating when you're doing a time trial than having to stop and wait for traffic lights, for traffic at a roundabout, etc. So wherever possible, try and do a time trial in a place where you're going to be as interrupted as little as possible. So a canal path is great, or an industrial estate after everything's closed down, which is well lit, could be a really good place to do your time trial. I think that's it in terms of tips for time trial. So also just bear in mind as well what it is you're actually wearing for your time trial. So if you've got a few different pairs of running shoes, wear a nice light pair, but make sure that it's a pair that you're going to use again next time, or a pair that you'll be able to have an equivalent running pair of for next time. So again, you're trying to keep as many things the same as possible. So in summary, time trials can be really effective to benchmark where you currently are in your training, wherever it is you are on your training journey. Use them sparingly, so every 6 weeks to 2 months as a maximum frequency. Make notes about how it went, what you can learn from it. We'll talk about that more in a future video when we talk about training logs. And have a think about what you might change for the next time you do a time trial as well. Okay, so remember, it's a time trial for now. So in a year's time, you might want to end up doing a different distance as a time trial. All right, because you just, your mileage is greater, or you're training for something very different. So your time trial session might not look the same as it currently does now. Okay, so hopefully that's lots of useful information for you about time trials, and I'll see you on the next video.